Hi everyone, or whoever's watching. So I saw Crimes of Grindelwald kind of late, but I still saw it. I saw it because the social justice activists were ranting about it, and I wanted to see what they were ranting about. Turns out they have nothing to rant about. Who'd have thought? But yeah, I'm going to talk about the film and why I liked it. And yeah, this video is going to be filled with spoilers. So yeah, spoilers all the way through. Okay, the first reason I liked it was because of the way that it portrayed Grindelwald and his rise to power. I thought it was a very interesting way to portray the character. I didn't like the way he was portrayed in the first Fantastic Beasts film. I thought he was kind of lame, kind of silly, kind of over the top, especially at the end when his true form is revealed. But in this film, they made him a lot more badass, a lot more intimidating. Like, from the very first scene, you get the idea that this is someone you don't want to mess with. Now, the film is called Crimes of Grindelwald, and I feel like we don't really see the full extent of his crimes in this film, so the title's a little bit misleading. But I think he is still a very frightening villain because of his ability to recruit people. So at the end of the film, the main characters come to one of his rallies, and we see this auditorium, this massive auditorium filled with hundreds of witches and wizards, and I think that's a really frightening scene because of the way that it shows, Grindelwald's power, and especially considering that he gained this power within the space of like a few months. So after he escapes and goes to Europe, and I thought that was really interesting. And it kind of made you. The film is a bit of a build-up film. It doesn't have much of a climax on its own, but it's building up Grindelwald and his power, and you know, indicating that something is going to happen in the later film. And I don't think it's fair to say, oh, the film sucks because it doesn't have a badass climax. I mean, it actually does have a pretty cool climax, but yes, it's not the climax of the Fantastic Beasts series, and it's not supposed to be. I think when a film is the second film in a series of 5, you have to evaluate it in terms of the role that it plays, which is to build up the other films. And I think the film does an excellent job of that. It really, sells the idea that Grindelwald is a threat and he's gonna cause trouble in the future. And I think, yeah, so I think what's really cool about him is that he is similar to Voldemort in that he is a charismatic bad guy who recruits people. But he's also different to him in that with Voldemort, I got the impression that he was exclusively recruiting pretty scummy people. The Malfoys are pretty scummy. The Restrangers are scummy. He's got some really hardcore evil people on his side. Whereas Grindelwald is still just as evil as Voldemort, but he has a more mainstream appeal. His ultimate aim of taking over Europe and enslaving the Muggles, that's a very unsavory idea. But he does a good job of pitching this idea at a more kind of mainstream wizarding community, and that's how he's able to recruit so many people. And I find that element of his character really interesting and really frightening because the more people you have on your side, the easier it is to execute your agenda. And I think that makes Grindelwald a really intimidating bad guy in his own right. And it makes him also, I think, a really interesting parallel for the alt-right. And I think it's definitely intended to be a parallel because of, the way that he recruits the privileged witches and wizards of Europe to be part of a racist movement that's allegedly not racist because, he says he doesn't hate Muggles, so obviously he doesn't. But yeah, it ties in with, I guess, that real world political element. And I think I don't know if this was intentional, but I think it's a very interesting parallel for the way that, people justify oppressing women. So Grindelwald says, oh, I don't hate Muggles. I don't think they're inferior. They're just different, and they have their different role. That's like what he's saying at the end of the film, although what he says earlier is we should enslave the Muggles. So he's got that, deceptive element to him. But I think that is a very interesting parallel for how women are oppressed, because supposedly, we're not inferior. We just have our different but equal role to play in which we are subordinate. So I think that's a very interesting, I guess, interpretation. Probably not what JK Rowling was doing for. She was probably doing for just more of an outright, parallel to racism. And it works on that level as well. And I think it does show how, like, racism can be promoted to a mainstream audience. We see Grindelwald kind of using imagery from World War II and nuclear bombs and whatnot in order to, like, convince the visiting community that the Muggles are a threat, that they can't be allowed to, I guess, rule their own society, and that they need to be dominated by witches and wizards. So it also works, I guess, as a parallel for like imperialism or colonialism or whatever you want to call it. First point. Second thing I really liked about the film, and this ties in with the first one as well, is Queenie's fall to the dark side. Yay. I despised Queenie in the first Fantastic Beasts film because she's basically just there to be this sexy woman who acts sexy, and that's her entire character. She is sexy, she is hot. She uses her mind-reading power to confirm how hot she is. And that's basically her entire character. And people thought it was funny, people liked it. I didn't. I think that's a really sexist way to portray women. So I didn't think there was any way I could like Queenie as a character. But then this film, did the one thing that is basically guaranteed to make me like a character, and that is making her, at least to some extent, kind of side with the villain. So she doesn't actually do anything excessively evil in this film, but it's just really cool to see her, like, not cool, but it's interesting to see her being seduced and, like, won over by Grindelwald's message. And the way that that happens, I think, is, again, very realistic, very true to how it happens in real life. The alt-right appeals to people because it can offer them something. In this case, it's offering her the freedom, I guess, to be open about who she is with her romantic partner, and to, like, supposedly Grindelwald's gonna give her the freedom to, like, be with him openly. And, of course, it's not really going to work out for her because he wants to enslave the Muggles. But his plan does include, witches and wizards revealing themselves to the Muggles. So it's, like, appealing to her on that level, in that it grants her the freedom to come out as a witch and be herself with the person that she loves. And I think that can be a really attractive thing that the alt-right offers to certain kinds of people. Point number 3 about why I like the film, and that's Newt's character. I know Pop Culture Detective talked about Newt's character in the first film and how he is a positive example of masculinity. I feel it's a bit weird to call him masculine at all. Like, I think masculinity is something that the culture invents, like a role that's invented for men that keeps men in a position of power. And I think that if a character doesn't conform to that role, I wouldn't say that they're representing an alternative form of masculinity. I would say that they're just not masculine. Newt isn't masculine. What he's doing doesn't conform to what society, the way he behaves does not conform to the way society thinks men should be, and therefore he just isn't masculine, and that's fine, in my opinion. I don't think we need to be pretending that he actually is masculine. But he's a cool character. He uses, I guess, gentleness and empathy to tame the dragon-like beast that we see in the film, and that is how he kind of succeeds. And I think that's an interesting thing to portray. It kind of shows that you don't always need to use aggression and violence in order to solve your problems. And I'm not a complete pacifist. I'm not of the opinion that you should never use aggression. I think that when you're dealing with the really, really bad people, sometimes you do need to fight fire with fire. And I feel it is oppressive to have women be told that they should never be aggressive or angry, that they should always be gentle and empathetic. I think that both of those extremes are pretty bad, or at least pretty limiting. But I think it is good to see, like, a male character being a bit gentler and a bit more empathetic, and showing how that can be the right strategy in certain situations. And yeah, it's Newt, like, he uses it on the beasts, and we don't really see him using it with people. He tries to kind of use it with Credence, at least in the first film, and it doesn't really work. So I think what the films are kind of showing is that, yeah, the empathetic approach works sometimes, but it doesn't always work. And it's interesting, I guess, to see how the different approaches to dealing with problems are used in the film. So Newt's kind of kinder, gentler, empathetic approach is contrasted with the approach that his brother Trevor takes. So Trevor, he kind of has the attitude. Trevor, if you don't remember, he's Newt's brother. He works for the British Ministry of Magic. His approach to, I guess, Grindelwald and his recruitment is, we need to go in there and, like, violently suppress the rally, or at least kind of hold it, use the threat of aggression to keep it under control. So Trevor, like, he's not particularly violent in that scene, but he is more willing to use violence against who he sees as the bad guys, so like Grindelwald and his recruits. And what this ultimately results in is a situation where one of Grindelwald's supporters lashes out, and one of, like, the ministry people kills her, or at least attacks her, and this just turns into a more violent situation. And so what it's showing is that, like, in that situation, the aggressive approach might not work, and that it's contrasting, I guess, that approach with Newt's gentler approach, and suggesting that maybe Newt's approach would be better in this situation. And I think that is an interesting approach to take in real life, because the approach that many people have towards the alt-right is, yeah, they're bad, they're evil, we need to silence them. And I think for some people that approach is justified. If someone is, like, hardcore, racist, misogynistic, horrible, I think there's a justification for saying, this person just should not be allowed to say what they think, because it's just going to spread more anger and hatred. But what the social justice activist movement does, sorry to have to rant about them again, I have to, it's relevant. What they do is, like, they cram everyone who's not one of them into this, category of being the bad guys, and they want to suppress them all. So they'll lump, the tweenies of the world with, like, Grindelwald and his hardcore supporters. And I think when you do that, you're going to turn a lot of people against you, and you're going to create more tweenies, more people who are, like, drawn in by the real bad guy. And so I think, yeah, if you're going to take a forceful approach, you have to limit that to the real villains, the people who are, like, committed to bad ideas, committed to, like, hatred and evil. And I think you have to take a gentler, more compassionate approach with people who may be getting seduced by those ideas. Point number 4, why I liked the film. I liked the darker and more serious tone that it took. I thought the first one was a bit too silly for my tastes. Like, it had a lot of slapstick humor. It had a lot of scenes where it was just Newt messing around with the beasts and, like, silly slapstick stuff that I personally don't like. If you like that, that's cool, but if you're looking for something a bit darker, a bit more serious, a bit more adult, I think Crimes of Grindelwald is the film for you. I think people have said it's like, it went Empire Strikes Back. I see it as being more like Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, so the second 2 Star Wars prequels, whereas the first Fantastic Beasts film reminds me a bit of Phantom Menace. So yeah, it had the silly slapstick humor, it had the lighter tone, it had the, sexualized tweenie Fantastic Beasts, which had that, which I didn't really like. So yeah, it had a lot of, I guess, kid-friendly, light-hearted, immature humor. And the second Fantastic Beasts film, Crimes of Grindelwald, does away with a lot of all of that. It also does away with, like, the scenes that are there just to show off the beasts. There was a lot of that in the first film, when Newt was just going through a suitcase, saying, these are all the beasts I have in my suitcase. And none of them did anything for the rest of the film. They were just there. And it's a bit like exposition plus cool imagery, but still basically exposition that wasn't relevant. I personally don't mind exposition so long as it's relevant to the film, but in this case, it completely wasn't relevant. It was just, here's some more cool beasts. And yeah, I liked world building, but I think it has to be integrated into the film. It can't just be like, let's show off our beasts and show off how good the effects are, which is what the impression I got from the first film. But this new film, they got rid of a lot of that. There's still plenty of beasts in there. They're still cool. They still do things. They're still expanding the world of Harry Potter, but it's not, the story does not get put on hold so that the exposition can be like dumped on you. There are some scenes that are a bit too exposition heavy, but like even then it's tied in with the plot of the film. So that's another reason I liked it. And just visually and in terms of, I guess, the feeling of the film, it's a lot darker. It's a bit like people compare it to Empire Strikes Back. I think they are similar in that people say Empire Strikes Back is the really dark Star Wars film, but if you look at what happens in the film, like nothing all that bad happens. Like it's what bad things happen in the film. Han Solo gets frozen in carbonite, but he's okay later on at least. And yeah, 2 bad guys get killed, and the rebels have to evacuate a planet. Like, okay, there's some bad stuff, but it's like there's worse things happening in other Star Wars films. What makes people, I think, say that Empire Strikes Back is a dark film is the tone, right? The imagery, the feeling, just the impression that you get is a lot, I think, darker in Empire Strikes Back. And the same thing is happening with Fantastic Beasts, Crimes of Grindelwald. Nothing all that bad happens. Like, we have the build-up of Grindelwald's rise to power, but he doesn't do anything particularly bad, and only one not very interesting character dies. But you still get the sense that this is a darker world, this is a more cynical world. This is a world where like bad stuff definitely could happen. And yeah, we have, a more serious tone and less of the silly stuff that I didn't like in the first film. And yeah, lastly, Dumbledore. So yeah, Dumbledore's whole relationship with Grindelwald. I thought it was portrayed excellently in this film. I really don't know what the social justice crowd is complaining about here. Did they want to see him make out with, did they want to see Dumbledore make out with Grindelwald? Did they want to see him have sex? Did they want Dumbledore to just say, I am gay and love Grindelwald? No, that's just silly. Like, you people need to learn how to read films. Okay? It's very obvious in this film that Dumbledore has feelings for Grindelwald. It's everywhere in this film. Like, from the way he says, I can't move against him, it has to be you. And yeah, that whole scene where Dumbledore is looking into the mirror of Erised, the mirror that in the Harry Potter world shows people their truest desire. He looks into it and like he sees himself with Grindelwald and like they hold hands and there's these little hearts flying around their hands and they form this like pledge, and they get like the locket or whatever that means that they've promised not to fight each other. Like, that is, intensely romantic stuff. It's not explicit, but it's pretty damn, it's very strongly implied. I think you have to be, bad at understanding films in order to not get that there's romantic feelings between them. And it just wouldn't have made sense to, show them making out or whatever, or kissing or whatever, because they're supposed to be fighting each other. But like Dumbledore can't bring himself to fight Grindelwald because he still loves him, even though Grindelwald is evil. Like, that's such a beautifully tragic story that I thought was portrayed brilliantly. And I don't see why people aren't getting it. I think they're just looking for something very specific, and when they don't see that, they get upset. Like, they want to see the coming out moment that in their mind defines what it means to be gay. But Dumbledore is like not a gay person in our culture. He's a gay person in a very different culture that, you know, the visiting culture is a lot more traditional. We're not explicitly told that they're homophobic, but it's quite likely that they are. And I think this is showing his experience of being gay within that culture. And it's a very like well told story that allows audiences to read between the lines. And I feel like that's a valuable part of film. Like, that's how films work. They don't tell you everything, they show you things. And you can't, on the one hand, complain that there's all this boring exposition, and then on the other hand, complain that Dumbledore being gay is not explicit enough. It's like, it's visually communicated instead of being stated, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But okay. You want to rant? So, like, yeah, my overall feeling of the film is that I don't think there's anything seriously bad about it that warrants complaints. I know there's other controversies, like the whole Nadini thing and Johnny Depp and whatever else. I'm not going to talk about them now, maybe I'll talk about them another time, but I don't feel like if a kid watches this film, I don't think they're going to get any seriously bad racist messages from it. I think the film is teaching people to be aware of racism, to be aware that like racist, prejudiced attitudes can hide behind a seductive veneer of like sophistication and rationality. And it's like teaching people to see beyond the surface. And so I think that people who watch this film are mostly going to get good messages from it. I'm frankly more concerned about the first film and its really insulting, sexualized portrayal of Queenie and like the silly slapstick stuff. Like okay, I don't know if the slapstick stuff is particularly harmful to kids, but like, I don't want kids seeing that representation of women. Like, and I'm not saying that the film as a whole was completely awful. Like, I didn't like it, but I think there are good ideas in the first Fantastic Beasts film as well. But this new film, Crimes of Grindelwald, it kept the good ideas, and it got rid of the stuff I really hated. So I feel that, yeah, if a kids watch this film, and it's not necessarily aimed at kids, but if young people watch this film and they enjoy it, I don't think they're going to get any bad messages from it. You know, some people might be bored with it, but that's okay. I wasn't bored for most of the film. I'm not saying this is the greatest film ever, but, you know, I don't go into films expecting to laugh and cry and go on a crazy emotional ride. Like, if you're if your standards are that high, you're probably not going to like the film, because there is exposition, there is, the messy plots, and it's got a lot of inherited problems in the first film. So, yeah. The plot's kind of confusing, there's lots of characters and there's lots of exposition, and if you don't like that, you're not going to like the film. But I feel like overall, it is a significant improvement on the first film, and I really enjoyed watching it. When I watched it, I was sick, the weather was horribly hot, I had to go to work later, and the film made me forget all of that. And I think that to me is what films have to do. They don't have to take me on this crazy emotional, ride. I don't expect to be laughing and crying all the time. I think some people expect that from films, and that's setting the bar a little bit too high. Like, different people are going to want different things from a film, and what I want from a film is to be entertained. I want to be mentally stimulated. And I think the film did that for me. It stimulated me intellectually, it made me think about stuff. It distracted me from the fact that I had to stack shelves for hours later on. And that to me makes it a good experience, It's a fine film. It's not the best thing ever, but it's okay. It's good. Enjoy it. Don't be a nitpicky whiner. I don't get that. I think that we're just putting such strict standards on people who are trying to tell stories, and it leads to a lot of problems. It leads to, stories that are appealing to the whiners who are going to complain about everything, but not appealing to everyone else. And that's how we get, shit like The Last Jedi. Oof. Okay, I'm not gonna land on that now. I'll save it till later. But I feel like, yeah, if you're just a, mainstream Harry Potter fan, you're not obsessed with all these silly little controversies, you didn't like the film because it's good and it has good progressive messages. So, yeah, enjoy it.